When me and my troublemaking friends were 13 years old, one of the many rowdy and mischievous things we would do would be Saturday night ding-dong ditch sessions. 10 years ago, we all lived on the same block in a typical suburban neighborhood. At the time, there were a lot less houses and more woods, though. I'm going to make up names for my friends for the case of this story. There was Mark, James, and either Mark or James were usually the ones to go up to the houses and ring the bells. I, on the other hand, would usually find hiding spots right away. We hit about 5 or 6 houses. I remember all of the men who answered the doors gave pretty much the same reactions. They'd step out onto the stoop, one or two would yell something, and then they'd walk back inside. For a couple of houses, we'd ring the bell again for a better reaction. One guy yelled he was calling the cops the second time, so when he shut his door, we all booked it down the street and went to the next block over. As I mentioned, 10 years ago in this neighborhood, there were patches of woods sitting where houses sit today. On the next block over, there were a few patches of wood surrounding some of the houses, and the houses on this block seemed to be more unkempt. The first house on the block was across the street from a patch of woods, which made for a perfect hiding spot. The house was kind of run down looking, tall grass, a ratty old car with a cover on it in the driveway, and overall just a small house. Mark went up to ring the bell. He barely had time to make it across the street before the door opened. It was another man to answer the door. This guy really big, about 6 foot and stocky build. Unlike the others, he was furious immediately. He walked around his whole front yard, checking the bushes, yelling threats. We all laughed as we always did. Eventually, he finally went back inside. Mark waited a few minutes, checked the windows, and then ran back up the stoop to ring the bell again. I didn't envy him with this house. I would not be bold enough to ring that man's bell again. Mark knew he probably didn't have as much time, so he ran to the side of the house and out of sight. The door opened much quicker this time, and this time the man came out with a rifle in his hand. We all looked at each other, simultaneously going, "Oh shit," under our breath. The man checked all the places he checked before, and then a few extra places this time, like behind his car, behind a couple trees, and then he walked to the center of his lawn and just stood there, as if he were thinking. He looked around, and then his head stopped as he was facing us in the woods. Me, Matt, and James looked at each other. We ducked lower in hopes that he didn't see us. After 10 seconds of staring in our direction, the man went back into his home. And then, we saw him appear at his front window, standing still like a statue, looking in our direction in the woods once again. We saw Mark creeping back over to the man's front door, but there was nothing we could do. We were too afraid to move or yell anything. Mark rang the bell once again and ran for it. The man didn't move though, at least not for another minute. And then he turned and walked away from the window. We didn't see Mark again, but we were still too nervous to move or say anything. The next thing I remember, we heard Mark's voice from across the street yelling, "Run." We didn't understand until we heard someone running up from behind us, realizing upon turning our heads that it was the man from across the street with his rifle in hand, pointed at us. We ran like little prey from a predator to Mark, who was waiting for us across the street. We ran for blocks until we were sure we lost him. Mark explained that he yelled when he saw the man sneaking across the street into the patch of woods with his gun. We didn't report him or any of what happened. We just told a few friends and that was it. Luckily the house was many blocks from us, so we never really had to pass it again.